Hi, welcome to the tar.knits YouTube channel. Today we are talking all things fall knitting. Specifically, we are talking about my practical fall knitting plans as well as my Delulu dreams. So the reason I think it's very important to specify that is because last year during my fall knitting plans, I talked about knitting 17 different items and it was very much so delusional. I do want to start this fall knitting plans with a little bit of practicality, if you will, a little bit of realism. I think last year I was just super excited about getting into fall knits after a summer and wanted to just really knit everything and explore everything. And where I had previously been primarily a stockinette knitter, I was just excited to try every single technique. Alas, if you do try to learn every single technique known to man in the span of 3 months, you are likely not even going to pick any of them up. So I think my bark was a little bit bigger than my bite with that, and I ultimately ended up knitting about 4 of the projects on those lists on that list over the course of the past year. So take it as you will. I'm going to take the learnings and use that to kind of inform my plans this year. Going into my fall knitting plans, I think there are 2 major ideologies or thought processes, but I guess goals that I had in mind. First, I didn't want anything I knit to deter from my goal of ending the year whipless. So what that means is I was not going to start a really complicated project that is going to take all of my time and mean I have to neglect my other whips, of which I have a handful, more than a handful. So that's the first thing. I needed to make sure that, you know, if I was going to do something intricate or complicated, that I would have, like, it wouldn't impede my ability to finish my other projects. So that was the first one. The second major goal is to ensure that I am knitting season appropriately. So I think in the past, I take so long to finish a project, and that's because I have so many whips going on at a time that, you know, I might cast on something and not really care that it's not season appropriate because I'm not going to finish it in that season anyways to enjoy it. I am trying to take a shift away from that mindset and really focus on reducing my time to completion with projects and finish within the season and enjoy within the season. Hasn't been a pressure I've put on myself in the past just because I haven't. I just wanted to knit for fun, but I do think I am focusing a little bit more on being more disciplined when it comes to my knitting, and that is one of the things that I am striving for. So with that, let's jump into the projects. Let's jump into the point of this video. First off, I think this will come as no surprise to anybody. I will be knitting the Maggie cardigan by Petite Knit. The Maggie cardigan is I guess it's a contiguous set and sleeve. That's what I've heard it be called. Some people call it the European set and sleeve or the European shoulder. I don't know. I'm just gonna call it the contiguous set and sleeve because that is, I've knit other projects that call it that, and it's a very similar construction. So the Maggie cardigan honestly needs no introduction. It is a very beautiful, it is a lightweight cardigan. It is knit in a sport weight gauge on 3.5mm needles using Cardiff cashmere. Your girl does not have cashmere money, so she will be knitting it with merino, which is still very lovely. But because it's lightweight, it is very versatile year round, and I think it's perfect for that transitional time, as you know, the days are warm, but the evenings and mornings might be a little bit chilly. I'm somebody who's okay with being a little bit warmer in general. I don't love being warm, but I generally wear full sleeves throughout the year and everything like that. So I think the Maggie cardigan will actually be really great all year round as a layering piece during the fall and the spring. But then also I could wear it in the summer as well, like not the dead heat of summer, but it's light enough where I can figure something out. That being said, I will be doing the standard modifications that everyone does for it, which is lengthening the sleeves and knitting a double knit button band. Really, that is the way to go, and it becomes the Pinterest cardigan of my dreams. So I will be using some relatively special yarn. It is, oops, the 100% merino from tar.knits in Copenhagen. I actually bought this on a trip to Scandinavia that I went with some of my knitting friends back in May of this year. So I remember spending hours, I swear, at this yarn store because it was the one I had done research prior to going, and it was the one that had the most stock of the yarns I was interested in trying and like looking at. And this yarn actually ended up being a little bit of an impulse purchase because I felt it and it was so soft and it was a good value for 100% merino. So I ended up purchasing 8 skeins of that. And here we are. I had initially purchased it to knit the poppy tee full sleeved, but the Maggie cardigan came out and I had to quickly shift my plans. Funny enough, that's actually what I'm knitting as we speak. You're not going to be able to see what's going on because I have scrunched everything up into the tiniest cable and we're knitting away. But I am almost done the yoke. So it is not even September 1st yet and I'm almost done the yoke. So I am feeling really excited. I was initially worried that I wouldn't actually be able to finish this project within a reasonable amount of time, and then it was just like, what was the point? And it would be dragging into winter. But honestly, I think I'll be fine. I'm using 3.75 millimeter needles rather than 3.5 to get gauge, and I think a standard DK weight sweater is like 21 stitch gauge, and I'm at 23, so it is going to be a little bit slower, but nothing crazy. And I think it's been about a week. Yeah, I started the Maggie cardigan on the 25th and it's the 31st, so it's been literally a week and I'm almost done the yoke, which is not the fastest thing in the world, but does set me up for success to actually be able to wear this hopefully in October. So that's the first project. The second sweater I want to knit is the Esther sweater by Petite Knit. Also needs no introduction. I think the Esther jacket was very, very popular when it came out. I think so many knitting influencers were knitting on it, and just in general I saw my feeds covered in it. I didn't particularly love the Esther jacket, but when she came out with the Esther sweater I was in love, and I think it's because the mohair in the Esther sweater, which is what the samples were typically made of, had like the texture, but it was diffused in the most like elegant way. So I really fell for how it looked, and I also think I probably just didn't like how big of a gauge the jacket was. The Esther sweater is a little bit more, it's a little bit of a smaller gauge, so it's not a small gauge, it's still like a worsted weight gauge, but I think it's 18 stitches for the pattern. But I just, yeah, I think it just made more sense. I am a little bit worried, I guess, if I won't enjoy how it looks using the yarn that I have planned. These are two of the 8 skeins that I have, and you can see that they're basically completely different colors, but I hand dyed some yarn using some Rit dye. I used actually the Patons Classic Wool Natural as the base, and I was trying to get a nice teal color and did not quite succeed, but I'm planning on using this yarn to knit the Esther sweater, and if the color situation bothers me a lot, I will just bathe it completely in another round of dye to kind of over dye it all. So I'm not too fussed, but I am like, I'm a little worried, but I'm not too concerned. My concern though is, am I gonna like it without mohair? Because I think the mohair is what really drew me to the sweater. Alas, I do not have mohair to spare right now, and I do not wish to buy any more yarn at this point in time, so we're gonna make do, and then if I don't like it, I will live with it and I will still wear it. It'll just be like a sweatshirt at home. I am currently in the process of knitting the Jenny jacket by Petite Knit, of all people, as well as the twist loop sweater by Other Loops. I talk about these pretty in depth in my last video, and with the twist loop I've been talking about it for some time, so feel free to take a look at those videos if you have any, if you're wondering what I'm thinking about them. But overall, I do anticipate that I'll be able to finish both of these projects. These are two, in my opinion, my 2 more difficult projects I have on my needles right now, and the only ones that I'm like, oh no, I don't know if I can power through it, purely because I am limited in the sense that if I over knit it, I could have severe like wrist pain, and we don't want to deal with that. So the goal is we are going to finish both of these projects, and let's see how that goes. So the next project or projects I'm going to talk about arguably could be considered one, but I want to knit a matching set. So specifically, I want to knit a hat as well as some fingerless gloves. In the past, I've primarily been focused on knitting garments, and you know, that's all good and fine and amazing because we love our garments, but I have now created a good collection of garments that I can wear throughout the fall and winter. But as a result, I think I can now focus on knitting some accessories. I think in the past, I just have never wanted to invest the time into like knitting these items, even though they won't take too long, because I just wanted to spend every single second like finishing this sweater or finishing that sweater or doing this test knit for a sweater. But I think my mindset is shifting, and I really do want to kind of create a full wardrobe, including really nice accessories. So I actually have a vision of a nice dark green set. Not quite sure what yarn I'll be using. One option is Drops Daisy in this green blue. I do think this is like a color that really does suit me typically. So I can see that on my head, I can see that on my hands. And I do think it'll be very pretty. That's option one. Option two is I could use some Drops Flora and Drops Kid Silk. I've actually used this combination in the past to knit the cognac sweater back in January of this year. That's a project I love. It's by Atelier Castin Marine. Just amazing pattern, really recommend it. But I love this color combination, and I actually had more yarn in stash than I needed for the sweater because the sweater was like quite a large gauge. So I do have a decent amount of leftovers. I don't necessarily know that I have enough leftovers to do both gloves and mittens, but that's an option. And then my third option is I have some double Sunday in Sailor in the Dark navy, my favorite color as of right now to wear, and I have just enough to make a hat, and then I might still do the gloves and the Drops Flora so that I can use up what I got. Context, I have a lot of the Drops Daisy, almost a sweater, like basically a sweater's quantity, so maybe I don't want to break it up. So those are my options for yarns. But when it comes to the actual patterns, I'm going to be knitting the Also Hat, of course, by Petite Knit. It's just a pattern that I have in my pattern stash. So I've only knit one hat before, and I may as well knit something that I have. There are a couple other hats that I have considered. Like I think the typical beanie, I think is what Tiffany calls it. And I think she has a typical hat as well. But I believe all of those are like worsted weight and above, and I really want something that is on smaller needles. Who would have thought I would say that? But I think I really want the density of a hat knit on like 3.5 or 3mm needles. So I'm going with the Also Hat. I don't really want to buy a new pattern. I just kind of wanted to go from what I owned. But yeah, it does suck. I guess that's another Petite Knit pattern on my planning list. I guess I didn't realize how dominated this list was with Petite Knit. That being said, the gloves, I think this is my first non-Petite Knit pattern. I'd really like to knit the Giselle gloves by Knits by Summer. I've actually tested for Knits by Summer in the past. I knit her Ella sweater, and I loved it. She's really, really sweet, and she's just like such a sweet soul. And I fell in love with her Giselle gloves. I think they're so beautiful, and just I think honestly the cutest fingerless gloves I've ever seen on the market, in the knitting market, purely for the fact the double knit border. I just think it makes it so refined. I typically see an I-cord or a ribbing, and those are cute and everything, but I just feel like the double knit just makes it so refined and just so seamless, and I can see myself wearing that all throughout fall. Every single fall I'm like, or winter, I'm like, oh, I wish I had like gloves, but I'm not gonna buy gloves because I could just knit them, but then I don't knit them, and then I'm just cold because I refuse to buy things that I could make. So that cycle ends now. That cycle ends this year. We're not going to be cold. The final kind of practical plan I have to work on is the Erica socks, which is from the 52 Weeks of Socks Volume 1. I think this is probably like the go-to like first knitting pattern that people knit from the 52 Weeks of Socks, like the first volume. I think most of my, not most of, but a lot of my friends have knit this pattern. I've seen so many people knit this online, and it is beautiful. And kind of reviewing the chart, it does look quite simple as well. I knit my first lace garment, like just lace yoke, last year, and I thought it was quite easy to follow. And I'm not like super confident in like complicated lace, but kind of looking at the chart for the Erica socks, they look really, really doable, and I wonder if I could even finish it in a weekend, or maybe I can knit one sock in a weekend. The yarn I want to use is, I have surmassed quite a collection of hand-dyed yarn from being on the Typical Bliss Patreon. So I don't quite know which hand-dyed yarn I'm going to be using, but I definitely want to pick something that is speckly and delicate and pretty for my first pair of socks in quite a while. I think the last pair of socks I knit was last May. Yeah, oh my gosh, it was last May or last June, and I was like, it took me forever, just because I was not mentally there to knit accessories. So that kind of concludes the realistic and like practical plans. I do have a few like delusional dreams when it comes to knitting. I don't necessarily think I will be able to knit these, nor do I even think I'll be able to cast them on, to be honest. But we'll see. I would love to knit the Lumme by Sari Nordland. This literally is just one of the prettiest colorwork sweaters I've ever seen. The Lumme, it just looks not the easiest, but as easy as it can get for your first colorwork project. I feel like I do want to dive into colorwork, and I do think colorwork is very much like a fall winter kind of, I mean, you don't wear sweaters in summer either way, but I think specifically it is a winter look. So it's not the end of the world if I don't get to it until winter, but I fear that if I don't get started on it, I just will keep putting it off. Yes, so the second kind of delusional dream that I have is to knit the Colette pullover, and this is like such a pretty cabled sweater, and I also think it's a very simple cabled sweater to knit, just because it's quite repetitive. The gauge, like the actual cables, are quite large, so you're not really cabling that often. It has a nice eyelet rose as a break, and it's just so pretty. I think the only thing that gives me pause with knitting this is that, actually two things. First is I don't have stash yarn that I think would work. In an ideal world, I would love to knit it off gauge and use some Knitting for Olive heavy merino that I have in navy, but I don't have enough to knit it on 4mm needles, and ideally I would knit this on 5mm, whereas the actual pattern is knit on 4mm. So I don't think A, I'd have enough yarn, and B, I do think it would be a little too dense for my liking at that gauge. So I would have to modify it, and I don't know if I want to get into modifying this pattern when I have the pattern. I could just follow it, you know. And I also don't want to buy new yarn for it. So I think that's kind of my little dilemma, my first dilemma. And my second dilemma is the eyelets. Like, I feel like that might make it limiting for me of like what I can actually wear with it. Just again, like I do wear pretty full coverage clothing, so as a result of that, like, will the eyelets be revealing little like windows of skin that I don't want to show? So that's where I'm at pause with that. I guess I could just skip the eyelets and just continue knitting it at cables, knitting it with just the cables, and that would be fine too, but we'll see. Yeah, I'd also like to knit another classic by Espace Tricot. So the classic has for a very long time been regarded as kind of just a dupe for Petite Knit's Louvre sweater. It's a very, very basic turtleneck, DK weight raglan sweater. It basically looks exactly like the Louvre. It just uses a different increase technique. And the reason this pattern is quite popular is that it used to be free. I don't believe it's free anymore, but I got it when it was free, so I do have the pattern. And I don't have the Louvre pattern because I've knit 2 of these already, and I really enjoy the pattern. So I think I'll just be knitting this, and I'm going to be using the Knitting for Olive navy. Yet I know, again, Knitting for Olive navy in the merino and the mohair. So yes, I have them both in the heavy merino and the mohair. There's a story for that we will talk about another day, but I just think it is literally probably like the most classic sweater you can have, like a navy turtleneck. Yeah, it's just like the perfect gauge to knit at. I love knitting DK weight on 4mm needles, and it's just like such a simple basic pattern that was gonna fit well regardless, using yarn that is beautiful, and it's just, you can't go wrong. I do already have a couple navy sweaters, so I am not in a rush to knit this, but I would love to own it. So that's I guess where we're at with it. I am very, very committed to getting through as many of these plans as I possibly can and just sticking to it as much as possible. I think I mentioned earlier, my theme of the rest of this year is really being as disciplined of a knitter as I can be. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm gonna like clock in my knitting hours like I would if it were a job, but it just means I want to be very intentional with the things I'm making, and how much I am putting on my plate, both in terms of how much stash I am developing, how many projects I have on the go at one time, as well as how long I'm knitting on a project for. If you watched any of my more recent videos, or if you follow me on Instagram, maybe you've also noticed that this is something I've been trying to do, but I really want to be more intentional when it comes to my knitting, and I really want to be more focused. And I'm really, really excited in January 1st to have no whips on the needles, maybe one. So I say I want no whips. I mean, like there's a leeway of one, and to basically be able to knit whatever I want, and not be like I have a million other whips that I have to finish before I can cast on this new shiny pattern that came out. And I think that is really my end goal of being a little bit more disciplined and being a bit more realistic this fall and this season, so that come January 1st 2025 I can literally, or like actually not just come January 1st, but from January 1st I can really just knit whatever the heart wants. That's a little bit of a look into my mind when it comes to not just the actual plans that I have for fall, but kind of the mindset that I'm going into the season with. So hope that was interesting. If you want to follow along more closely, feel free to follow me on my Instagram, where I do more regular updates, both on my stories and my posts. As well, if you're interested, please do hit the subscribe button. I have plans to be a lot more regular with my posting, so hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Have a wonderful day, everybody.